Welcome to the Claville Report, a report that talks about law, policy, and politics. These three areas tend to dominate our lives every single day. This report was created to pull back the covers, eliminate the white noise, and understand the reasoning behind the world today. We're about giving you the facts from all sides and not personal opinions. We're not about what should be and should not be, but instead, we're about what is and what can be. And now, here's your host, E.W. Claville.
Hi, thank you again for joining us for this segment of the Claville Report. I'm your host, E.W. Claville, and we're going to break down the election overview in this particular segment. A red wave or blue fatigue. Election 2021 was one that put the entire country on notice. We're going to focus on mainly two states, the Commonwealth of Virginia and also New Jersey. We're going to take a look at what happened in those states. And keep in mind that this election in these two states, these elections in these two states come after the 2020 election, the historic 2020 election of ousting former President Donald Trump and bringing in current President Joe Biden and Vice President Harris, the first Black woman of color, and woman to serve as Vice President of the United States. So let's break it down. What happened? During 2020, we saw what we call, again, historic. I'm calling it historic. It is historic when you look at the voter turnout, voter registration, the issues we were dealing with coming out of a once-in-a-century pandemic that shut down the entire world, economic issues across the board due to the pandemic. Even before the pandemic, we had a lot of issues that were brewing that came to the forefront, such as student loans, issues such as businesses that are strapped with small businesses strapped with lots of debt that borrowed a lot of money at zero interest, but were simply not able to get out of that and bring their sales and their business revenue up to a point where they could pay that back. We also saw where there were social issues, social justice issues that we were always dealing with. But again, it came to the forefront during 2020. More specifically, issues with police in communities, also public health issues, maternal health, and just access to good health care in poor communities, Black communities, brown communities, communities of color. All of this came to the forefront. And let's not forget, we were also dealing with a constant crisis every single day. Keep in mind, we were, for 5 years, I was talking with a colleague and saying how we were traumatized for the most part for half a decade. Because every day there was something that was coming from the top of the White House down. And we also saw issues of white supremacy. We can go all the way back to Charlottesville, where the Unite to Right here in Virginia, the Commonwealth. We can look at the proposed militia capture by militias of the governor of Michigan, also the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And then, of course, the murder of George Floyd, the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, the issue of the bird watcher in New York, the issue of across the board, just issues across the board of social justice that came to the forefront. So America said, we can't live like this anymore. We need change. It was in our face. We could not deny it. And we brought in a new administration. Lots of promise, lots of relief. But then January 6th happened. And we saw where angry Trump voters Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol, something that's never happened before in our history. And also displaying the Confederate flag in the sacred halls of Congress. And we see now the prosecution of hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals. And we're going to talk about that later as it relates to is justice being met or meted out equitably against these individuals that try to overthrow our democracy and stop a peaceful transfer of power. But that's going to be another segment. We'll talk about that later as these particular trials go forth. But out of all that, we got President Joe Biden. We got a Democratic wave across the country of, again, promise of inclusion, promise of cooperation, working together, helping to get America and the people that were left behind up to the forefront. That was the issue. Those were the promises. And then we started negotiating, and we get what we have now is a stalemate in Congress as it relates to a lot of issues where the infrastructure bill, building America back, and the like. So, but we're going to deal with that more in depth as well in another segment of how Washington works. We have clogged pipes. But now in 2021, we have two states, and more specifically the Commonwealth of Virginia, which becomes the bellwether state, the state that is the test case for the current party that's in power, the current policies that are proposed, the current philosophies that are embedded in our political discussion. It becomes a test case to determine if this is the way that we should go. If Americans say, I like the direction or I don't like the direction. And for almost a year, we have the former governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe, campaigning for really about almost a year for a return to the governor's mansion after the term of current Governor Ralph Northam. Now, never before, well, only twice in history, but in modern history, once has a governor been elected to another term. And that governor actually had to change parties from Democrat to Republican in order to win the election. And of course, that was around the 60s and a lot of issues of civil rights and also the switch of individuals moving from Republican to Democratic Party taking place. But for the most part, it's never happened in our current time. So we have a former governor that campaigned and secured support from Democratic mayors across the Commonwealth, secured support from major Democratic representatives of the General Assembly, the Senate, and secured support from a lot of the traditional organizations that support the Democratic Party and agenda. And then you have the other side, the Republican side, that didn't have a convention, that didn't have a primary. They had a convention where they ended up voting, and it was where they ranked choice their votes for candidates to represent them in the primary, in the general election. So with that, they ended up choosing businessman and founder and co-CEO, co-founder and CEO of the Carlyle Group, Glenn Youngkin, for Lieutenant Governor Winston Sears, the former delegate out of Virginia Beach, and also a former prosecutor and delegate out of Southampton Roads area, Jason Mayars. Of Cuban immigrant, Winston Sears, a Black woman of Jamaican heritage immigrant, and again, Glenn Youngkin, white male from the Southampton Roads area, born and raised, and became a very successful businessman. So these were the individuals that were chosen to represent the Republican Party and the interests of that particular party and those that wanted to support a different vision and change. So for approximately 9 months, I would say all the way up to easily up to September of 2021, we have former Governor Terry McAuliffe, who's running a campaign and running ahead between 9 and 10%. And as we get closer to that last debate, that lead shrinks to about 7%, but still a very comfortable percentage where everyone felt that he would be reelected as governor. Something that hasn't happened in our modern time, but it was going to take place. All along, you have the Republican candidates for statewide office who are campaigning, more so grassroots, meeting with various individuals in the community, business community, other public interest, special interest groups, but still lagging behind. But we have this issue that's brewing in schools. And we see school boards and parents that are fighting with school board leaders over mandatory vaccination rules and bathroom policies as it relates to transgender students, and also sports policy as it relates to transgender students. And you have and then we also throw in the issue of race under the umbrella of critical race theory. And they're fighting back and forth about basically, should we implement these policies? And as it relates to critical race theory, I want to make a point. Critical race theory is not taught in our K through 12 schools here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. But what has been implemented under the Northern administration is the elective of African American history, and through the Department of Education, the inclusion of the full history, as it should be properly deemed and called, of treatment of African Americans in America. So the full history of slavery being taught. And we'll talk about that more in depth in another segment as we take a look at the politics of race, and more specifically, how we've never ever dealt with and included the full history of America. And what I mean by that, we never included the horrors and the reality. Well, I'll say the reality of slavery, because there are horrors to realities of slavery. In the book, there was a commercial that was out where a parent talked about her son reading Beloved and was having nightmares. And one thing that was left out of that clip was that basically it was a slave scene where it was the horrors of slavery, a person being meted with punishment and the like. Trust me, we all will have nightmares if we live through those horrors. I mean, but hats off to our ancestors that went through those horrible times and lived through those horrible times to produce who we are today, and also to create and produce our country. We need to honor them. We need to honor them that lived through that time, but at the same time, understand those that meted out those unjust measures of punishment, injustice, and those horrific conditions in which human beings had to live through, but came out stronger and better for it. There's nothing wrong with understanding the whole history. There's nothing wrong with understanding where we come from. If you feel guilty about it, it's not meant for you to feel guilty. It's meant for you to understand and have a better understanding of why we are here today. As a matter of fact, I believe that as African Americans and as Americans, we really don't understand and never dealt with the horrors of that time period. Therefore, we really haven't dealt with the trauma and why African Americans are in part where we are today. But we'll talk about that more in depth later. But that is the race of politics, right? Or the politics of race, and how those issues started brewing at the school board level. Now, all was well until there was one state during the debate that former Governor Terry McAuliffe made, and they took a clip of it. They didn't give the entire clip, the entire statement, but they took a clip. And that's politics, right? You take a clip and you blow it up, right? And create a bad image or a positive image. A bad image for your opponent, a positive image for yourself. But he stated that parents should not be involved in what their kids are learning at school. But he started to talk more about how, again, we're involved, of course, you have PTAs, you have school boards and so forth, and opportunities to engage them to understand and how your children are being educated. not just how, but also to be involved. I was a member of the PTA. I was an officer in the PTA. My father was the PTA president for my sister's elementary school. I was on the board of our kids' parochial schools. Parents, I was a homeroom dad. I was what we call we had a swagger wagon, as I call it. Some call it a minivan, but put all the guys in there. We're going to this sporting event. We're going there. Yeah, parents were involved. But they took that clip and they created a messaging around that, where the moment that happened, a grassroots movement surrounding Parents Matters movement and campaigns were now organized around that messaging of education. And all of those issues that parents were dealing with, school boards were dealing with, and parents were forcing them to deal with, came to the forefront. In other words, there were these minor issues, well, not major issues, that were one at a time, but under the education message, they were able to message it all together. And now we have that umbrella of Parents Matter, that umbrella of parents being involved in education. After that happened, the lead from 9 to 10%, sometimes 7%, shrank to 1 or 2%. The day of the election, it flipped to a 1 to 2 percentage point advantage for Green Yuck, and it stayed right there. Before we went on live air to give political analysis on the local television stations here in the area, I was asked by each reporter, what do you think is going to happen? And I said, Glenn Youngkin is going to win this election. And it's going to be between 50 and 60,000 votes because of the issues that I just articulated. Unfortunately, the Democratic Party was not able to combat that messaging with their own messaging about education. So because of that, a red wave came through the Commonwealth of Virginia, where not only the Democratic representatives in the general election lost, each by 2%, 51 to 49, for governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general. But also, the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus lost 4 seats that were out by Republicans. In some districts, it was Black Republicans that beat out Black representatives or representatives of the Democratic Party. Also, we saw other districts flip that were key to having the majority in the House. So in one election, around one messaging, the Commonwealth of Virginia went from reliably blue in the last several elections, both for governor, president, and also governor again. If we go back to Terry McAuliffe in 2013, if we go back to Barack Obama in 2008, 2012, if we go all the way back to Governor Northam in 2017, we go back to just now, Joe Biden in 2020, all Democratic. The last statewide Republican that won election was Bob McDonnell in 2009. So with that, we see where the wave went through the entire Commonwealth, from the top of the state, the suburbs of DC, to the bottom, to the traditional Hampton Roads area, the military industrial area for installation for our state and really the country. So was it a red wave or was it a blue fatigue? Let's take a look at New Jersey very quickly. Now, the Democratic governor narrowly won re-election, but the president of the Senate actually lost, narrowly lost. The longest tenured president of the Senate in the history of the state lost, not to a major Republican candidate, but to a truck driver who spent maybe $10,000 on his campaign, who said that he was just a simple guy. And it was the voters that wanted change and did not want policies rammed down their throats to say that they have to do this or have to do that. That message within itself is significant. So let's take a look at the policies, is it politics or is it policies that caused these races to be so close and many to lose? Or was it campaigning? So let's deal with the campaigning part, then look at the politics and then policy and see how this impacts 2022 and 2024 moving forward. So campaigning. I started out as a grassroots organizer in college. I believe as a political science major, I believe that knocking on a door, right? One door at a time could save the world. An issue that people are dealing with in their community. And I organized many different areas of the capital city that I went to school in. But in every community, we organized around a different issue. So we had these lists of communities, lists of voters that said, listen, this is the issue that you're dealing with in your community. We're going to organize a campaign and effort to deal with this issue. And if there's another issue that comes up, we're going to organize around that to help defeat it. This is the issue that you're dealing with in your community. So we're going to organize an effort here to deal with that. And on the state level, these are the issues that we're dealing with on the state level, right? So with that, it was so effective because people felt as if they had a voice in their own community. And they felt they had a collective voice together. Now, fast forward, the Democratic Party themselves is really a grassroots party. Blue-collar workers, African-American voters who are the most faithful, most reliable, and the largest voting bloc in a lot of states for the Democratic Party. And then, of course, your union workers, your Latino voters in some states, the largest voting bloc, and then also your voters of young people and college students. Many people believe that the McCullough campaign left grassroots voting, grassroots organizing, grassroots campaign. Now, they spent about each candidate spent $57 million approximately on this election. Probably go up to maybe 60 after all the numbers are counted, but really at the day of the election, $57 million per candidate. That's a lot of money. But a lot of individuals who are in the community-based, community organized, people who live in the community for years, people who know Mr. and Mrs. Williams or Mr. and Mrs. Jackson over there, or Mr. Such and Such who's over, pastor of this church and has this nonprofit organization or this group, or this person who's a radio personality and always in the community doing something. People know these individuals, but it wasn't those individuals that were contacted, that were given the opportunity or even talked to in order to organize campaign efforts. Yeah, surrogates come out of the state and come into the state, big name surrogates. And then some individuals that were what we call, they work in different Democratic campaigns. And this happens in every, both the Republican Democratic side and independent side, where you have individuals who work campaigns and they know how to campaign and so forth. I've worked with many of those before. So we understand that. But when you want to win a local election, all politics is local. Whether it's a local election, statewide election, national election, you have to organize on the grassroots level. And many people feel that simply did not take place with this campaign. Also, the issue of messaging. I mentioned the lack of messaging to combat, the education message. Many people felt that there are a lot of great things that were happening, but they felt left behind after the 2020 election because they felt that they didn't know what was being done for them. They felt that things that were happening were not affecting them on just the personal level. We look at the issue with student loan forgiveness. Day one, before the election, the president was all about forgiving student loans. After the election, it's like, I don't know if I can do this or not. I'm going to kick it off to the Department of Education and see if I can actually do it. Congress is saying do 50. He was like, I can do 10, but I don't know if I can do it. All the way to fighting over paid family leave, to be included. And all these social issues and policies that we're dealing with, nothing's happening. Yes, there were a lot of things that were done. And I will tell you from a policy standpoint, a lot of great things that were done for the people. It was done. Whether it be historic funding on the state level for HBCUs, whether it be access to the voting ballot, to the ballot box, created on a legislative level. These great things were done. But politics is all about what have you done for me lately? And can you tell me about it? Can I see it? The Youngkin campaign talked about it. Increased gas prices, talked about other table issues, and more specifically, school issues. So here's what happened. When we talk about policy over politics, or politics over policy, was this a campaign of that, of either or? It was really both. The question becomes, how can you take policy and wrap it around the politics of it in order to mete out them, to give the message to the people? The school issue was going to win this race, education, hands down. And here's how it went down. In suburban communities where you have a lot of two-parent households that are involved in their kids' education, a lot of people left the major cities in order to create these school districts. A lot of families, I would say that. In more urban settings, you have a lot of single-parent households that dominate these urban school districts. So during the time of the Trump administration, what you have now is Trump was just so extreme. It was just an absolutely traumatizing time for our country. But his support waned amongst women. It waned a little bit amongst men, white men, but it still stayed strong. So in a household of two parents, more specifically white families, you had the male that voted during Trump time for Trump and the female voted for Biden. So you split the vote in the House. But under this Parents Matters movement, where you have policies that parents fought against that dealt with their children on an everyday basis, those individuals, both the father and the mother, voted for the candidate that won the education message. And that message was centered around education policy. So if you look at the numbers, how they broke down, because keep in mind, both the governor of New Jersey and the former governor here of the Commonwealth of Virginia, they didn't win. The governor of New Jersey didn't win by that much. It was narrow. And Terry McAuliffe here, the former governor, did not lose by that much. It was narrow. We're talking 1.92 percentage points. That's a very small margin when you look at an entire state, a state of over 8 million people and of almost 3 million registered voters or more. That's a small margin. Now, this election had record turnout. It had record early voting. We had over 1.1 million early voters. And I think that when you take a look at in the future, strategy in the future, I think for whoever is going to win future elections in 2022, 2024, moving forward, got to get back to grassroots campaigning, grassroots organizing around messaging, and grassroots voter registration. That's going to win the future elections. People want to know, how are you impacting me on a grassroots level? Yes, commercials are important. Yes, having a campaign operation is very important. Yes, the numbers, the statistics, and the software is very important. But the day is gone where you can tweet yourself to an election win. It's not going to happen anymore. You literally got to walk the streets, talk the message, and meet the people where they are. That's always been the backbone of politics. That's always been the backbone of the community, and will always be. Thank you again for joining us for this segment of the Claville Report, where we took a look at the 2021 election overview. A red wave or blue fatigue. Stay tuned as we continue to look forward in our crystal ball at 2022 and 2024. Until next time, be well. God bless.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Claville Report. Make sure you subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. For information or to connect with E.W. Claville, check out our website at www.theclavillereport.com. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to @The Claville Report on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. This has been the latest episode of The Claville Report. Until next time, be well.